E noho e te whānau. E noho ana ki tōku taumata whakamaru-maru o nongo taha takarawa iho rangawai o tuhina e piri nei. Ki te taha pukiroa o rowhata ka huri tāku titiro ki tiheia e aru koreko ana nā. Wai o wahau e aira e tāku titiro ki ngā wai. Kare kare i a rotoru anu i a kahu. A tamata kapu e tū mai nei, tihei mauri ora. Whakarongo, whakarongo, whakarongo. Whakarongo ki te tangi e te manu e karanga nei. Tui, 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 tui a. Tui ai runga, tui ai raro, tui ai roto, tui ai waho. Tui a te here tangata. Karongo te pō, karongo tāo. Tui a te kāwai, ka mai, wai ki nui, wai ki roi, wai ki pāmamao. Te hono e wai rua, whano, whano. Hara mai te toki, haumi e, hui e. Me atu ki te atua, whakona rea te Queenie Māori, ngā wai hono te pō, tēnā koe, tēnā koe, tēnā koe e te Queenie. E ngaiwi o te rohe nei, a tamaki a herenga waka e, tēnā rā tātou, tēnā rā tātou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. I ngā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. I ngā whānau, hara mai, hara mai, hara mai. E mihi ana ki te kaupapa i tēnei rā, ki te kaupapa nunui, ki te kaupapa a tāhua, ki te kaupapa a honongoa, mahi o rongo. E te whānau, hara mai, hara mai, hara mai. E tū, he wai. I te rangi e tū i honei. Te whaia, papatu e nuku e ta koko nei. Ora hia te marino, i runga ki te moana. Koia mai te waka, kunea mai. I te tākotoranga, tākotoa te waka. I te tākotoranga, tākotoa te waka. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mai kina kia ki ita, kia mā taratara ki pai. Te hi aki ana, te apakura, te tio, te hita, te hautu. Tihei mauri ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi ki a kōrua, Nick rawa ko Maikara mō tō mihi whakatau I tēnei ata. I thought it was very appropriate, the waiata Maikara, me mihi ki te rangi. So for those of you who are listening to the reo there, may the seas be calm, because we have a very large overseas contingent from Te Motu Aotearoa, from Waiheke. So can we just see how many have come from overseas today and braved the, yes, 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 woo! So we made it. Let's just say I've been up since 3 o'clock this morning, kind of listening to the howling wind and the rain and going, are we going to get here? But we're obviously meant to be here. And to all of you who have braved the wild weather to be here, kia ora, nau mai, haere mai, thank you for coming to be part of this really important kaupapa. I just will quickly talk about keeping us safe, whakahaumaru. So the first thing is emergency exits. So I think everything you kind of go left. Yeah, go left. Emergency exit here, and we're about 2 flights down, and then emergency exit at the back, again, go to the left. If you need the wharepaku, the toilets, also go left, and please use them as you need. A very quick overview of how we're going to roll today. I'm going to be very short, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. We are going to have a chance for questions, and then pretty much we're moving into a nice cup of tea, which is great. I do want to welcome, we have 500 people joining us online today. So kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. I can't see you, but hopefully you can see us. And they have come from all around the motu. And there may even be some genuine overseasers. I'm not sure. Did you see any on that list, Murray? Yes, okay, beautiful. And whatever time of the morning or day it is, welcome. And of course, we have a room full here. And it just really demonstrates that this is a kaupapa that's very much meeting the moment, right? So as you know, you're here to hear from Aotearoa, the Helen Clark Foundation, for a research that they have commissioned on social cohesion in Aotearoa. So on behalf of Albert's, our very generous host, the team is down the back, and also Connected Leadership and all our rōpū, we want to welcome you here today. It's my great pleasure to introduce the Right Honourable Helen Clark, who, as we say, it's a cliche, but my gosh, it's true, needs no introduction, but, you know, three things. Of course, former Prime Minister for New Zealand, and the administrator for the UN Development Programme, which is when I met you in New York, Helen, as you were about to fly off to Rwanda. And now an elder, a global elder and statesperson who is speaking into the moment with great courage, great intellect, great fortitude. So tēnā koe for that, Helen, and we welcome you here today. Kia ora. Let's give a big hand to Helen.
Well, thank you, Sue, and kia ora, everyone, and thank you for hosting us, Sue. I understand Connected Leadership does a lot of mentoring with women leaders, and that's just so important because if we start to talk about inequalities, there still are quite a few in that respect. You said you saw me just before I went off to Rwanda and New York, and you might recall that was actually followed by Hurricane Sandy. And I got lots of messages from New Zealand to say, are you okay in the hurricane, which flooded lower Manhattan? I said, yes, I'm in a safe place called Rwanda, which which comparatively speaking was true at the time. However, thank you everyone for being here. It's really Shamabil's show. He and the co-researchers have done the hard work on the report. And let me thank the Tyndall Foundation, the Todd Foundation, the J.R. Mackenzie Trust for supporting the work. Shamabil's already done a tremendous job in the interviews he did on Q&A last week with Jack Tame, and also the interview with Jamie Morton in the Herald, sadly soon not to be a science reporter at the Herald, and we really miss the work that he's been doing. But I think a lot of New Zealanders will probably find the results quite startling because they don't square with the self-image that we have. You know, when we read that only 51% of people in the survey saw New Zealand as a land of opportunity, isn't that a wake-up call? Don't we often think of ourselves as a country where anyone can achieve what they want? Well, that's not what Kiwis are feeding back in what appears to be quite a substantial survey, which has gone to considerable lengths to make sure that demographics in society are well represented. And when we look at the survey results, it doesn't paint a very happy picture of us as a society. And we feel particularly unhappy when we see that we compare poorly with Australia, because we are quite competitive. I think the overall unhappy findings are reflective of several phenomena. Clearly, the economy is not producing enough work, and that it is producing is not at high enough pay levels for many people. That's complicated by the huge impact of housing costs on most, probably most household budgets. Our social wage is not high enough. We don't do enough to even up the odds. And not time for big elaboration today, but there's a very good article in The Conversation online by Finlay MacDonald, who used to edit The Listener, on the Gini coefficient. That's the standard measure internationally of inequality and what it says about New Zealand. So there's a graph with a red line that says there we are on income inequality before tax and transfers. And then when you turn over the page and look at income inequality after tax and transfers, we actually slide quite a few places. In other words, if we look at who's doing well when you adjust for tax and transfers, you're going back to the societies like the North Europeans, which do a lot more on social wage and transfers to give people a better chance, despite incomes being lower. So associated, I think, with the relative deprivation levels which have risen in the society, a lot of people have become just a lot more cynical about what New Zealand has to offer us. There's less trust in institutions, which is quite worrying. Less trust in institutions over time leads to less participation, for example, in voting, which means then when we vote, not enough of us vote, and it's not the outcome isn't a reflection of the overall views in the population. We see the global factors from affecting a lot of other countries like ours also playing a part. For example, the hangover from the pandemic, which happened to coincide with the omnipresence of social media and that use as a channel for misinformation and disinformation. That's not going away anytime soon. And now, relating to the current political environment in the US, which really thrives on disinformation and misinformation, you're seeing the platforms like Meta basically stop their checking functions, right? They don't care what's there as long as someone's clicking and the ad revenue is coming in. So all of these are factors, I think, in driving unhappiness in the society. Now, a slightly sobering observation. Many years ago, when I was at UNDP, our division that looked at issues of poverty globally produced a report in which it made the observation that the more unequal a society is, the harder it becomes to do anything about it, because entrenched elites then have less interest in doing anything, and those who are left behind participate less and less. So that locks in inequality, and that's not a place that we want to be. So the mission of the Helen Clark Foundation these past 6 years has been to shine a light on the challenges which New Zealand is facing, and then to propose ways of addressing them. So in a way, this report, which we've co-sponsored with Shamabeel and others, is a bit unusual in that it presents findings which are a bit bleak, but really the challenge is now to think about what ways do you address these things? Do we want to carry on down the path that this survey is indicating, or do we begin taking the steps and policy measures which would endeavour to turn things around? And I think that's clearly an area where the Foundation would want to encourage more debate. And let's hope there might be more debate today on what are the ways of climbing out of the situation that we've got ourselves into. Thank you. And the next act is Shamabeel. Kia ora, no pressure.
Thank you, Helen. Look, it's so wonderful to see you all here and all our friends online. Really gratified to see that you find this topic just as interesting as I did. So I was talking to Rosie about this, that we've been thinking about social cohesion for a long time, but we didn't necessarily have the language for it. We could see the discomforts of society, we could start to see the fractures, but we didn't necessarily have the language. And the purpose of this work was really to go, where are we at? And where does New Zealand measure? And then start to begin the work of what happens next. I have a very strong view that any kind of change takes about 10 years. So we need to start somewhere and we need to go, what are we going to do? So when I was reading the Khan review in the UK on the back of the riots and all those kinds of things, I was really quite frightened. I read that stuff and I thought, oh my God, what's going on in countries that we thought were mature democracies. When I looked at the report, it also said, but you know what? If you're going to talk about social cohesion, you need to talk about it in a way that's consistent and that's going to help us understand what it means. So when we started this survey, it was very much about going, let's not make lots of judgments about what social cohesion means and what it looks like. Let's start with a really objective measure where we're not trying to poke our finger in. So we looked at the Scanlon Foundation's survey that they do in Australia. We replicated that for New Zealand, and that's what I'm going to present to you today. I'm very grateful to the Helen Clark Foundation, the Tyndall Foundation, the Todd Foundation, the Jeremy Kinsey Trust, NetSafe, for all supporting this piece of work, and Talbot Mills did a fabulous job at a very cut price to do the survey for us. And my business, Rosie and I, we did this pro bono because we can and we think it matters. So the frame in my head is that when we talk about social cohesion, we're always talking about a continuum. We can be cohesive, we can be fractured, we can be polarized. It's very easy for us to go, it's one or the other, but it's always somewhere in the middle. And there's always a path for us to get back. Cohesion is really hard to describe. It's essentially the glue that holds us together. It's the fact that we're able to connect with each other, that we're able to do something, that we're able to make those hard strategic choices, that we can disagree, and yet come to a conclusion. We did some work a few years ago looking at what worked well after the earthquakes in Canterbury. And what was really fascinating was they went through the years of confrontation to find a set of ideas that they could agree to. And when the earthquakes happened, they got rid of the vexatious people at the fringes, and they just got ahead with what 80–90% of New Zealanders and Canterburyans agreed with. But we haven't been able to follow that process again. Why not? What's wrong with the community that we can go through this process to find confrontation and agreement, but can't sustain that momentum? Cohesive societies are able to have these difficult decisions. Polarized societies are not. When I look at Brexit, when I look at the rise of the far right, when I look at Trump and Trump again, what I see is societies that are becoming more cleaved across political and other lines. I wanted to know, where is New Zealand? And that's what this survey helps us understand. We very deliberately wanted to do a race against Australia because when John McCarthy and I were talking from the Tyndall Foundation, I had a very strong hope that we would be better off. In fact, I was quite cocky and said, surely we're going to be better off than the Aussies. They're way more racist than us. It turns out no. Who would have thought? On every dimension, sense of belonging, sense of worth, social inclusion, justice, acceptance and rejection, New Zealanders fall behind. We did participate a little bit more. We did do social inclusion and justice just a little bit more because more of us participated in hikois and protests on the back of the treaty issues. But except for that one question, we were behind Australians even on that dimension. And you can see on the right-hand side that across many of those dimensions, New Zealand is falling further behind. And those gaps are not one-offs. When I look at the specific questions, they're quite widespread. When I look at the questions, what I find is this fracturing that's happening not only along the dimension, but across different groups of society. And that is powerful, right? And what I find in the data is not that we are polarized. What I find is that we are fractured, that there are different groups that are finding different things that are missing from their lives, from their community. And I think it's really important for us to keep hope that not everything is broken. Because I think when you sometimes see this kind of data, it feels hopeless, it feels dispiriting. But I think New Zealand still has hope. We have many good things we can build on. This is a slightly complicated picture, but essentially what I wanted to show you is when I look at some of those very specific issues, those dimensions of sense of belonging, sense of worth, those dimensions of social cohesion that we measured, when we look at the cross sections of society where we see big divergences, that kind of sense of fracturing and polarization, we see this across most strongly amongst the divide between rich and poor, followed by people of different political opinions, far less difference between Labour and National, and far more difference across the fringe parties, the smaller parties. And this is what we're seeing around the world. The rise of those smaller parties, they're giving a place for those grievances to take hold. They're representing those fears and hopes that people have because those center parties are not doing that. And my very strong view is that the Labour Party and the National Party in New Zealand are both center-left. One is center-left and the other one is center-left-left. So it's not that the contest is there, the contest is being fought on the edges, but those political alliances, I'll show you some data later, that shows you that we're starting to see some of these fractures opening up in different parts of this political spectrum. We also see massive divergence across work participation, particularly for unemployed people. They really do find it very difficult to connect with community. So unemployment is absolutely correlated with poverty. Essentially, if you don't have a job, it's really, really hard to have a good life in New Zealand. And our welfare state is not generous enough to give people a leg up to climb out of poverty. But we also see differences, and you'll see this later, that people who are staying at home, people who are students, people who are retired, are in some of these metrics feeling less connected and less positive. Worryingly, we see quite big divergences across ethnicity. And it's everything from young Maori who feel like they can't trust the institutions to young white men who feel like they can't trust the broader settings. These divisions are not clearly defined. They're different people finding different areas of issues. We see some differences across age as well, very much around financial comfort, around social inclusion and justice, and around participation. We're seeing these kind of different areas of pressures coming through where the young and old see New Zealand in very different ways. There was a fabulous Ipsos survey that came out a few months ago, late last year, that showed young New Zealanders in particular don't see much hope for their future compared to older people who think New Zealand still has so much to offer for everybody to succeed. And those divergences mean that we are not speaking across divides. We don't know that our lived experiences are not necessarily the experiences of the next generation that's coming through. This lack of understanding is a problem. So we do see these divergences, but I was quite pleased to see that we don't see the same divergences when it comes to geography or composition of family and some of those other bits and pieces. And that's really good because, as you know, I'm quite infamous and unwelcome in Wanganui these days. I called it a zombie town once. You do that once, apparently. The reason for that was, of course, that Wanganui had not been growing for a number of decades and we needed to do something. And of course, to prove me wrong, Wanganui grew very strongly after I called it a zombie town. So it's really in visions and not so much geographic. It's not about where you live, but about the conditions in your life which we can affect. Policy choices are possible to respond to these kinds of things. So I want to kind of focus on 5 highlights and 5 disappointments from the survey with you. And what I've shown you here, it's a little bit busy, but I want to take you through these kind of big issues that I found really interesting and where some of those divergences show up. So one of the big highlights for me was 82% of New Zealanders have a real sense of belonging in our country, and that's a really positive thing. It's not that different from Australia, 85% there. But you can see that men, unemployed people, and poor people found that less to be the case, and the divergences were quite big. 2/3 of New Zealanders believe that neighbors will help each other. That's a really positive thing because we know that our communities are still holding together. But we're well behind Australia, where 82% of people say that our neighbors will help each other. And that's really powerful, right? I mean, we need to have the ability to rely on our neighbors. What happens when somebody's kidnap's being picked up or the pet needs to be fed or whatever? Having your neighbors who are able to create the sense of community is really, really important. So we're not necessarily doing terribly, but we are doing worse than the Australians. And again, I see big divergences in Auckland. People feel far less connected with their community and their neighborhoods. People who are unemployed find less connection in their community, and people who are poor find less connection in their community. Some of the institutions that I think in New Zealand are world-class, like our courts. My experience of the courts is it's fair, it's contested, it's really transparent, it's a really good process, right? But it turns out not everybody feels that way, and not everybody has that experience. And we are privileged, and I am privileged, and it's interesting to see in the survey just how many people don't believe that courts are fair. Only 57% of New Zealanders believe courts are fair. Very similar to Australia, which is 55%. And if you look at where that distrust is, it is amongst Pacifica, it's amongst Asians, it's among under 30s, and it's amongst poor. There are cultural reasons, there are experience reasons, but there are many reasons that sit behind it. But when we are creating this environment where there are groups of society who cannot believe in the institutions that are there to serve them, that is a concern. Because that trust is what allows us to be able to offload some of those conflicts to the system. When you can't offload those conflicts to a system, what do? You have less choices. In New Zealand, we still have a strong belief in democracy, and 57% of New Zealanders believe that elections are fair, and this time we beat the Aussies. Yes. Only 38% of them think elections are fair, which I think is really shocking. But again, when you have first past the post system, it can feel unfair, especially when you want those parties at the margin who represent your views, who do give you that ability to kind of see yourself represented in politics. Suddenly, you can't see why it is that their system is not giving that voice in the same way that you would like. So in New Zealand, we do see, relatively speaking, much more acceptance, not a huge amount, but much more acceptance that elections are fair. But you can see, again, the kinds of people who don't think elections are fair. It's concentrated amongst Maori, Pacifica, under 30s, and people who are at home. And we don't know for sure why these things are. So this year, we were very deliberate and very specific in just trying to find out what is the lay of the land. Our ambition for next year is to actually ask them, why is it that they felt this way? We needed to have a baseline to understand where we are before we ask the question of why. And Helen already mentioned this. Just over half of New Zealanders believe that hard work brings a better life, which is an extraordinary sentence, right? What an extraordinary statement that only half of us believe that hard work will give you success. We have built ourselves this narrative that anybody can succeed in New Zealand as long as you just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Well, clearly not true. Clearly people don't see that. Clearly that's not the lived experience. And it's not about blame, but it's about understanding. Do we know why it is that those people feel that way? We have to be able to cross the divide to be able to know these people as individuals, not as stereotypes of people who are dole bludgers or whatever it is, those names that we might want to call them. Not me, other people, bad people. But you can see who are the kinds of people who are more likely to say that hard work is not enough on its own. Women, even today, right? Women are one of the most likely to say hard work on its own is not enough. We still have sexism in our society. We still have issues of women's progress in our country. Young people, repeatedly we see young people coming up across some of these very specific questions who just don't see the same level of progress as other communities in New Zealand. And again, amongst the unemployed and poor. That is the common theme in all of this. If you're poor and if you are unemployed, if you're not connected to the labor market, if you don't have good incomes, you are going to find it really hard to find the space and the ability to communicate, to connect, and to live a good life in New Zealand. I had 5 disappointments. And the one that shocked me to my core was a quarter of New Zealanders said they went hungry sometimes or often because they didn't have money. A quarter of New Zealanders in a country that is one of the best in producing food. Our own people are going hungry. How pathetic. But it's also entirely obvious. The people who show up here are not because they are brown, it's because they're poor. It is literally just a function of not having enough money. It is poor and it overlaps with Pacifica, Maori, unemployed and under 30s, because those are the people who are more likely to be poor than anybody else. And so it's not surprising that when you've got a quarter of the country being hungry, is it really surprising that a third of New Zealanders support a strong leader? That they do not believe the political system that we have is fit for everybody, that it's actually going to give them what they need. And surprisingly, some of the strongest feelings in support of authoritarian leaders was amongst Asian people, amongst Maori, amongst poor and rich. So in one thing, we're united between the rich and the poor, in wanting those strong people, strong leaders in our country, and middle-aged people, people in the ages between 30 and 44. I'm just on the cusp of that. But it's really interesting to see where some of these polarizations are taking place and where some of the agreements are taking place. We are crossing the wealth divide on, I think, just the worst possible things. A third of New Zealanders are satisfied with their financial situation. And of course, that's related to the current economic conditions. And Australia is doing a hell of a lot better right now. But still, 60% of Australians are comfortable with their finances, 32% in New Zealand. When it's a factor of nearly 2, we have to ask ourselves, what's going on? And is it any surprise that so many New Zealanders are choosing to vote with their feet and go to Australia? When we look at who are unsatisfied with their financial situation, again, absolutely no surprises. It's the poor, the unemployed, people who are working part-time, people who are students, and people who are at home taking care of family, either children or older people. feeling safe, walking alone at night was striking in that 45% of women did not feel safe. 45%. What an extraordinary statistic. But looking around the room, I think you'd agree, right? It hasn't always been this way. But if you look at the kinds of people who are really worried about walking alone at night, yes, of course, women, but it's also students. It's also people who are retired. And surprisingly, people who are New Zealand First Party supporters. And it's not a judgment. I just didn't expect it to show up in the data because I can see which bits are kind of really unusual and amongst poor. And we know that, right? Because there's more violence amongst poor communities and those kinds of things. And the last one that I found really quite troubling was this massive gulf in our perceptions of immigration. And the reason why it was such a big surprise to me is because in the last decade, New Zealand has been extraordinarily dependent on immigration for population growth and for our access to workers and skills, right? That has been the shorthand for how do we meet our skill shortages and economic growth in New Zealand. In Australia, 8% of people say immigrants don't make good citizens. In New Zealand, it's 49%. Right? As an immigrant, that's bloody scary, right? As my children who look like immigrants who've grown up in this place, it's scary. But it's also fundamentally scary because immigration has been a fabric of our nation's history. And for the country to be so against it in such a big way is worrying. The most against immigration are people from New Zealand First, people who are ACT Party supporters, people who are unemployed, people who are at home, people who are poor, and people who are more likely to be Maori. This is not one stereotypical group who don't like immigration. It is a wide group of New Zealanders who are really uncomfortable with the situation. Now, I'm not going to go through every statistic in the report because I'm a nerd and I love this stuff, but I know you don't. But I wanted to give you a sense of just the sense of discomfort I got when I saw these results. I had to walk away from the results when David emailed them to me because I was so disappointed and upset. It was very confronting. So we don't yet have a very good answer in terms of so what happens from here, but I know what it's not. What the social cohesion survey and the idea of social cohesion is not all of us being the same. Diversity is good, it's okay. We will always have differences of views and opinions. We should not be trying to wish away confrontation. And when I was doing the interview with Jack, he goes, but do you want confrontation? I'm like, yes, absolutely. We want to have debate, we want to have conversation, but it should be civil and we should be able to change our minds if the evidence is put to us. It's our inability to accept evidence, in our inability to engage in good faith that's hard. And we should not wish away politics. Politics is there for a reason. We want to be able to confront these decisions. We want to be able to have these contest of ideas. But what we don't have a contest of is whether there's a problem. What we want a contest of is what are the right solutions. And we are absolutely capable of doing this in New Zealand, right? I look at housing policy in New Zealand. 10 years ago, we were arguing about whether there's a problem or not. Today, we're arguing about who's got the right ideas for the solutions. I'd much rather be here than where we were 10 years ago. Across political parties, we are still capable of arguing for the solutions, not just the problems. There are some ideas on the kinds of things that the literature says could be useful in terms of improving social cohesion. The first one, I think, is a big ask. It's about better leadership and better political processes. Not just politics in terms of theater of politics, but the actual processes for people to be able to participate, people to be able to feel engaged in the way that we make decisions. But there are also individual things that we can do. And that starts with what we're doing today. First is awareness, just understanding that maybe things are not quite so good as we hoped, that there is a problem in this country, but it's not irrevocably broken. The second one is really hard. It's holding up the mirror and asking, what stereotypes do I hold and are they inaccurate? Can you see a person beyond the stereotypes we hold of others? If you're a rich person, do you think about poor people all as the same? If you're a white person, do you see a brown person all as the same? If you're an Asian person, do you see politics in one lens? There's so many different lenses that we apply, and stereotypes are extremely harmful because sometimes we can't see things at face value. What we see is the stereotype. What we don't see is the thing. And the final thing is the really, really easy one that we can all try and do. which is that opportunity of positive contact. And what I mean by that is when we have a conversation with somebody, let's have a conversation, not try to convert them to our view. We have descended into this slinging match in social media in particular, where we're there to try and convert people to our point of view, not actually to have a conversation. The Social Cohesion Survey tells us a very important thing, that maybe things are not quite as good as we hoped, that we are behind Australia. I've shown you that there are some things that are still quite positive, and I've shown you many things that are quite troubling. The question for us is, what do we want to do next? And if I can leave you with one really clear takeaway is, for each of our interactions in life, can we just have one interaction every day where we converse rather than we try to convert? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to move into Q&A, but just check that you know the person next to you. Have a quick conversation now, and let's make sure we all know who we are, or behind you, or in front of you. Kia ora, beautiful. So, come up. I'll field it. You probably don't need me to. It did not. I'll leave you. I think, yeah. Do you want to do sitting? Yeah. Yes.
Online folks.
I have no idea. They just find out. I'm sorry I suggested that.
That's a whole bunch of people.
Only just starting now.
So you have to be accepting people as they
All right, kia ora koutou. So we will have time for more kōrero afterwards. Conversation. That's great. Look what we've started. I would acknowledge that most of the people in this room are probably on the right side of those stats, right, Shamabil? Probably mostly feel included, have confidence in our institutions, political process. I don't know that half of us feel safe at night, as speaking as a woman, and I can certainly see the gender pay gap echoing through there. So we're going to have questions and answers. Should we try for questions more than comments? Should we just give that our best shot? And what I will do is, if you have a question, could you tell us your name and where you're from, just so our speakers can have, our respondents can have an opportunity to work out, aha, I see why you're asking that question. And I think I'm going to have to come to you with a microphone. I think that's how it will work the best. So who's going to kick us off? Stella, kia ora.
Kia ora. I'm Stella, Head of Strategic Partnerships at EcoChoice, Aotearoa. I'll try and not comment, but thank you for very insightful stats, very confronting stats. I get to have conversation on this very topic with quite a wide range of people, but the quality of the conversation and questions on this topic disappointingly drops quite a bit when I engage with people at the governance level. compared to people who are doing the mahi at operations. What advice do you have for people who either report to the board or are on the board who needs to wake up to some of these statistics?
I think one of the most interesting things to me about what Shamabil's saying is that we have to learn how to have conversations where people actually engage and listen. And I think what you're reflecting from the feedback you get at certain levels is that they're not really having an ear open to what a range of views are. The people can get quite complacent in their own settings and not think, oh, hang on a moment, this mightn't be how other people are feeling about it. You know, in a way, that very last slide of Shamabil's where he put up, you know, what are some of the answers, and I mean, we could add a long list to that, but one of the points you made, Shamabil, was awareness. Maybe we all need to be a little bit more aware of how others may be feeling, rather than just assume, well, we feel like this and that's fine because, you know, the people down at the golf club or wherever feel the same way. Well, that's your microcosm. So how do we, you know, open up a conversation where people are more open to hearing perspectives that they may not agree with, but can have civil discourse about? And that was what really struck me about your interview with Jack Tame, Shamabil. You talked about, no, don't run away from the differences. Try and debate them, you know, see where the common ground, see where the shared vision could be.
Kia ora, thank you. Question.
Hello, kia ora, thank you. Momita, I'm here in my personal capacity. I'm very passionate about the topics that we're discussing here today. There were two numbers that we saw. One was 49% of immigrants do not make good citizens. That's a belief, the feeling. And it's quite a dichotomy that 82% of people, many of whom would identify as immigrants, feel a high sense of belonging to this country. So that's quite a dichotomy in the numbers. And I also did not see any significant mention of immigrants on that who feels less of a sense of belonging there. And as a new citizen in New Zealand, I'm very curious to know how are we achieving this balance?
What it may mean is that while immigrants are feeling better about it, that the others aren't. That's the dichotomy, isn't it, that the figures are showing, but I'll leave it to Shamabil.
I think it's a really good question. And what was really interesting is we did not find a big divergence of views between those people who are born here versus people who are not born here. But what we did find was there was a divergence of views on specific issues. And in fact, some of the most racist views came from immigrants. So we just got to be really conscious that it's not just white people who are young that are racist or whatever. We all have the capability to be racist. So there's some really confronting stuff in the data. And I didn't break it down into all the different bits because you can slice and dice it in a million different ways. But what we did not see a big divergence between where you were born. The bigger driver was if you were born in this country or if you're born overseas, but you came here and you have a bad experience in terms of being poor, feeling disconnected, unhappy, then those feelings are what gets projected onto those other bits and pieces. And there is a broader dichotomy between people saying, I feel connected to the country, but I don't feel connected to my community, and I feel lonely, and I feel angry, and I feel all of those things. So the idea of the nation is still very strong, but the reflection of that nation in their local community and their personal experiences don't necessarily translate. So the dream is still real, but I don't think the reality matches up for a lot of people.
Twyford, Labor's immigration spokesperson. I'm quite struck.
Timing is everything, isn't it?
I'm quite struck by what the data says about the disconnect between where a big chunk of the public are on migration issues and where I think politicians, most of the parliament and the sort of policy class are at. And I wondered if you have any reflections or insights based on this work about the way that politicians and the policy class should be talking about these issues and engaging with the community, with the public. And the obvious, I think, backdrop to that question is the rise of right-wing populism all over the world, where that disconnect has been exploited to really poison democracies in so many places.
So Phil, the immigration questions were extremely confronting, especially when you compare to Australia, where there is a general acceptance that they see value in immigrants. And so there is a connection between the immigration policy and the experience of immigration. I don't think that is true in New Zealand any longer. And so I really encourage you and your counterparts in other parties to have a really good think about how do we connect with New Zealanders on this issue of immigration rather than taking a technocratic approach. You cannot palm it off to the policy wonks at MB to come up with a policy because people are not responding to the policy wonks. They can't understand the language of the policy wonks. We have to speak to people as if they're a part of our community because they are our community. So I don't think the advice is any different for immigration than anything else, except I think it shows up there because it's easy to other this group. It's just much easier than every other group because they're obviously different. So come and have a chat to me afterwards. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody across the political spectrum on this issue because fundamentally, if we look forward to the next 50 years for New Zealand, immigration can play a positive role for the future of New Zealand because of an aging population. But it will not if we don't have the social license for it. If we rely on technocrats to make that happen, we will fail. We have to get people on board with this conversation. And that begins with conversation actually at the grassroots level. Any comments, Helen?
Well, I think there's also the issue which Shamabil brought out in the interview that I saw, that immigrants in a way have been used by politicians as quick fixes for growth. But if you're not planning around that growth in population, the housing pressures, the health system pressures, the infrastructure pressures in a big city like this where often first port of call for immigrants are schooling pressures, I think that all builds into the picture as well. So we've kind of gone for the quick wins, but not been prepared to invest to ensure that the society works for everyone with basically more people. You know, we've tried to fit many more into what we had, and it doesn't quite work. So I think that also is part of the underlying feeling that's being picked up here, and probably most acutely experienced in housing, where there just wasn't the investment and the range of housing to satisfy the needs of the society.
Going to do two more. One.
Oh. Kia ora, Malcolm Rands. I was the founder of EcoStore, and now I've migrated to the Fairground Foundation, which is what I set up EcoStore for. An underlying issue with malaise that people don't talk about, I think, actually is climate change. And I think you see that with the young people looking at the future. You know, if they're smart, they see what the future could be. And I just wondered if any of that, there was any questions or anything came out through that addressed climate change.
Great question, Malcolm. Malcolm's an old friend of mine, so it's not a plant, but it's a good question. The answer is no, we didn't in this survey, but Malcolm, please come and support the next survey because we will be doing focus groups, which will be exactly about finding out why do people feel disconnected, particularly amongst young people. In Australia and other countries, we have found climate change to be one of the key concerns for younger people. So absolutely, absolutely. And again, that's the reason why we plan to do this survey year in, year out, so then we can track this over time. And from next year, we're looking to expand it to include that question of why do you feel the way that you feel? Because I think that's where those insights will be just so powerful for us to understand what's going on in the story behind the statistics.
And that'll be interesting to see. There was a kind of headline finding, I think, that climate change showed up as the most significant long-term issue, so that needs to be drilled into. But I agree, it's felt particularly acutely by younger people. I think, Greta Thunberg's, Friday school boycotts that took off globally and had pick up here. There is a feeling among young people that their future has been compromised. It's led to quite a lot of intergenerational discord as well, because there's a tendency to blame those who went before. And we've got to try and bridge that divide as well without shying away from the debate.
Kia ora, ko Izzy Horrocks tōku ingoa. I'm CEO of the Aotearoa Life Course Fund. And I had a question about our tamariki, our children, with your widow at the end, which is we need to be able to sit down with people who are different and have a conversation. And I'm just interested in the views of our tamariki, which obviously are not captured in the survey. Do we have any ability to understand social cohesion in the next generation and what they're learning in the classroom, on the sports field, about that ability to have conversations or even experiences with people who are different across divides? Just wondering if there's research or literature in that area. Thank you.
What a wonderful question, and I feel completely unprepared to answer that. Mainly because there's some significant ethical issues in terms of interviewing children. So I don't feel like this particular survey would be appropriate for our young people. That is not the way to do it. But I hope we can pull in other people who will be able to do that piece of work, because as a board of trustee on my local primary school, I do see the issues that our young children, primary school children, are dealing with are so different from the ones that I deal with. Their perspectives are different and they're important. In fact, many of the decisions that we're making today on climate change, on pensions, on immigration, they're the ones who'll pay the price of the wrong decisions. Not us, we'll be long dead. They're the ones who bear the cost. But they'll also bear the benefit if we make the right decisions today. So you're absolutely right. I think it's something that we need to work on, but I don't feel qualified to give an answer to your very good question.
Nor do I, but I would say that UNICEF globally has been tremendous at gathering the views of children. They're one of them. Children are one of the major groups in the UN system, and UNICEF works so hard to get opinions from children from around the world. And often on their social media, you will see the direct reflection of what children are thinking and saying. So that might be a partnership worth thinking about, to see if the approach which UNICEF has used globally could be used here to explore a little bit more.
Kia ora, thank you, everyone. I'm now going to hand over to Murray Bruce, who's the Executive Director of Aotearoa, the Helen Clark Foundation, for closing remarks. And somebody at the back said to me, we don't know who you are, so I should say, kia ora koutou, ko Sue Watson tōku ingoa. I'm the Director of Connected Leadership. Thank you.
Kia ora, Sue. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. My name is Murray Bruce. I'm the Director of the Helen Clark Foundation. Some fascinating, sobering signals coming out of the excellent work that Shammi Beal and Rosie have done. I think it's clear that there's going to be a lot of turbulence and instability in the years ahead, and it's not hard to see more rather than less pressure coming on social cohesion in New Zealand. And it's social cohesion really is one of those load-bearing walls of democracy, and we really want to see our cohesion maintained and strengthened in the years ahead if we want this country to prosper both economically and socially, despite the very uncertain times that we find ourselves in. We've got a gem of a country here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but we'll need to make some smart long-term decisions to navigate this period, and I think that'll be much easier done with a cohesive society rather than a fractured one. A few thank yous to close out this event. As mentioned, we're delighted to work with Shammi Beal and Rosie, and excited that our foundation will be the institutional home for this work in the years ahead. It's really important to have a kind of quantitative basis to measure these really important issues by, and we're really looking forward to seeing how it tracks in the years ahead. Thank you to the Tyndall Foundation. We've got John and Libby here today. Thank you to the Todd Foundation. I believe Charlotte is here today. And to the J.R. Mackenzie Trust for seeing the value in this work and investing in it. Thanks to Brent Carey and NetSafe, who have funded I think a really exciting social media campaign based around this work. And hopefully you'll see that come through your feeds in the days ahead. Thanks once again to Alberts for putting this on, and to the formidable Sue Watson Connected Leadership for sponsoring and organizing this event. And finally, thanks to you all for caring enough about social cohesion to attend this event in the middle of a storm, no less. So ngā mihi nui, thanks once again.
We're going to have karakia mutunga, and before we close up, ka nui te mihi ki a koe. I mau mai tō whakaaro nui e pāna te oranga o te ao o ngā tangata hei oranga he piki ake ki ngā oranga o mātou tamariki mokopuna. So for those of the future, our tamariki are really important to me as a school teacher. I thank you for your research and how we possibly can move forward for a better future. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka inoi tātou, tēnei te huinga o te tangata ka oki. Tēnei te mauri o te wānanga ka moe. Ko te ngākau me te wairua ki a wātea. Ko te tīnana me te hinengaro ki a tā. Whano, whano. Hara mai te tuki, haumi e, hui e. This gathering of people will now rest. The deliberations are suspended. The heart and soul are free to rejuvenate. The body and mind has time to relax. And may these words progress into conclusive actions, because we all agree in unison. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Now, waiata we're going to sing, e tū koutou, is tūtira mai. What? So tūtira mai, a tira is a gathering of people. And it's about coming together and standing strong. And the purpose why we're here. So think about the solutions you can bring to this space. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou e. Tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou e. Pai a te maramata, me te aroha e ngā iwi, ki a taputahi, ki a patahina, tātou e, tātou e, iau e.
Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia ora! Haere ki te kai, we've got a beautiful morning tea, thanks to Alberts. Our kaimanaki Maikara will do our karakia kai, will bless the food for us so we can safely consume the deliciousness. Please continue the kōrero, connect with one another, and importantly, join the Helen Clark Foundation. Woo! Thank you so much.